What I thought I'd do is, excuse me, what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about, I've done this before, talk a little bit about the eco-poetic in city eclogue, but I want to extend it further this time. I want to talk a little bit specifically about the spatiality in some of the images, especially the images of the new poems I read last night. So I'll just start off telling you a little bit about the eco-poetic in city eclogue. I finished writing the concluding poem in my book, City Eclogue, nearly 3 weeks after the book had been published. Like most writers, I often have that moment of one more thing to add after a poem is finished. That moment usually is the basis of another poem that will most likely show up in a later serial sequence. This time, though, I was like that British painter Turner, who was rumored to have stood in a gallery at an opening retouching a work that had been accepted and already hung there on the wall. My lines, however, came in the hotel room as I was practicing for the first public reading from the completed book. I had read that particular poem before, but this time I was reading in its context, in the sequence, from the page proofs. The lines are added a few stanzas before the end of the poem, and actually complete and extend the thought in some of the early existing lines in the poem about Eratosthenes calculating the circumference of the earth by geometry applied to measurements of the shadows. Those lines are the lines that are added. Circumference, the world's circumference is just a line, but once we know our lives are on that line, we have nowhere to go but round each other. Sort of manipulating the idea of circumference there, the roundness of the thing. These added lines distort the stanza out of proportion to the going. It's a 10-line stanza pattern. It distorts that. But I've never had so strongly a feeling that of conclusion that I've said it at that moment. The stanza pattern goes out the window because I'm keeping these lines, and if I don't always add them in the reading publicly, I think these lines say it not only for that line of thought in the preceding sentences in the rest of the poem, but also completes a statement of what the poem is about, and surprising me, what the whole book is about, and sort of what I've been about in writing so many nature poems all the time. It's really that last poem in the book, Eclogue, is about me writing, trying to write world nature poem. Writing poetry for me began with the nature poem. Most beginning writers record outpourings of their personal emotions of adolescent conflict, usually your love. I did that, but not so much as pouring out my feelings about what I was doing, which was traveling around Alaska, Canada, US, and Bermuda. I was doing nature. I was an undergraduate research assistant in limnology, which is freshwater chemistry. We were collecting samples in the field, recording and analyzing data on a very simple level for me, for a team of researchers who were doing kind of complicated work. My first nationally published poem as grand prize winner of the Atlantic Monthly actually sounds like that undergraduate lab assistance to some god of nature. It starts out, I must be careful, which I always had to do and loved it. I must be careful about such things as these, the thin-grained oak, the quiet grizzly scared into the hills by the constant tracks squeezing in behind them closer in the snow, the snared rigidity of the winter lake, deer after deer, crossing on the spines of fish who look up and stare with their eyes pressed to the ice in a sleep, hearing the thin taps leading away to collapse like the bear in a high quiet. I must be careful not to shake anything into wild inhalation, not to jar the fragile mountains against the paper farness, nor avalanche the fog or the eagle from the air. Of the gentle wilderness, I must set the precarious words like rocks without one snow-capped mistake. By the end of this early poem, nature turns into words. The poem is as much about the experience of writing as it is about the experience and observation of nature. I think this is also my early understanding of words as an appropriation, not just a single record of the familiar, of the unknown, but to take control over the known, over the word. Appropriation implies that in the takeover, the taken is changed to conform to the taker. In other words, those are my carefully chosen bears, grizzlies, not the real ones that walk by you and scare the devil out of you. They're not nature's. And with that comes a suspicion that the poem also is not nature. As if I'd stuffed and mounted these things on a wall. I'd appropriated grizzlies without their active appetites, without their teeth. Those teeth stay behind in a missing nature. The missing appetite and teeth came to reinforce my sense of how the human experience of nature differs from nature, real nature, that there is always an unknowable hidden aspect of that larger world. This mystery beyond words is the root of our mythology, our religion. The life of this outside, the life of this nature, however, has no limit. Our life has limit. There is no outside of nature to experience. To current theories of ecopoetics, man can't be outside of nature, and our life exists inside as an act of nature. Even our experience of the supernatural rises out of its likeness in the world, out of our limited being. Ecopoetics sees the world of human existence resting in or rising out of the earth. The world is not the same as Earth, and that's what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. The world is not the same as Earth. The world is our experience and the structure of that knowledge in which we live and the lives that are part of that larger thing, that larger life that is Earth. The nature poem occurs when a sense of the larger Earth enters into the world of human knowledge. The main understanding that results from that encounter is that the world's desires do not drive the Earth, but the Earth does run the world. The Earth is very generous with this, and I say so in this I Must Be Careful poem. The distinction between world and Earth was made very clear a few months ago, about a year ago, when the New York Times had an article talking about the melting of the glaciers. Alaska's Portage Glacier was an example they used. I used to pass that glacier as Dr. Dugdale would take us to our stations. My response to that was sort of something like this. People are grabbing at the chance to see the Earth before the end of the world. The world's death, piece by piece, each longer than we. Some endings of the world overlap our lived time, skidding for generations to the crash scene of species extinction. The 5 minutes it takes for the plane to fall, the mile ago it takes to stop the train, the small bay to coast the liner into the ground, the tidal line of nations until the land dies, the continent is uninhabitable. That very subtlety of time between large and small. The media notes people chasing glaciers to retreat up their valleys, and they mention the item of speed. Watched ice with speed. Speed made invisible. Now, days and a few feet it's further away. A subtle collapse of time between large and our small human extinction. Its ice bear disappears into his white and melts, and the ground beneath him to vapor, into air. All that once chased us, and we chased to a balance, chasing it back, tooth for spear, knife for claw, locks us in this grip that we just now see our lives taken by, taking the bears out. Hunting the bear, we hunt that glacier with the changes that have come of that choice. I'm going to skip way ahead on this and get to the good part. With the relocation of the world subsumed inside the natural Earth, it's my belief that what is also occurring is a new way of mapping spatial imagery, a remapping of our images of distance, containment, and the idea of an outside. We can't write a space only in objective description. We can't even write our space as if we were merely, as if it were our mere making or experience of it, and that was the scene's totality. We can't write images anymore of a space as though our framing contains or completes any meaning to be extracted from the perception of those images. We have to include in the statement of the image evidence of the perspective of our senses, because that perspective is no longer a simple and silent understood. I'm thinking that one of the best poetic techniques for writing this relocation is poetic synesthesia, crossing the senses. This technique isn't anything new, but the importance of it, I think, is greater. Synesthesia is the best hands-on tool we have, hands-on in the sense of immediate impact to body, tool we have in poetry. We have set our feel of our place in nature incorrectly, and rewriting that place from two differently placed senses is a good place to start that resetting. The reality of our inclusion is where I want to begin. And what I've been working with is images, spatial images of our inclusion in nature, not just sort of putting us in the picture, but sort of putting us in the feel, having us feel ourselves in nature. This is the end of the opening poem to City Eclogue, and it's about the sequoia trees, 2,500 years of growth, and I guess, 375 feet tall, drive cars through them. But those things, for the length of time that they lived, they almost live in fire, because there's a forest fire about every 40 years. And you divide their lifetime with that every 40 years, and they must get a major forest fire once a week in our time, it must feel like. So those are trees that live in fire. And one of the things I wanted to point out in that opening poem was that they've learned to adapt to that. The fire actually opens the seeds. Some of them can live without the fire, but they have learned to live in fire like we learn to live in rain. And the ending of the poem, though, says that we try to live in fire with our wars and with our fighting each other. But here's the fruits. We want to have the fruits of a pleasure in lifting our scale into the scale of a weight we feel we're part of. Into that dish we feel rest into balance, our nature in nature, nature in us. So I want to go on the rest of the time sort of presenting my results of this kind of study of trying to relocate ourselves in nature. I have a poem, it's called By the Rivers Of, and it's about my godsons coming home from camp. The boys came in the house home from camp that summer. They were stopped so many feet into their running through the door, made to meet the guests. They were required to sing what they had done today. They sang of being taught, though they thought they knew already how to swim. And here's where I try to begin in this poem, try to begin that us in the world image. Asked if they liked it, the youngest explained that what he liked the best was to come in through the top door of the water into the city underneath the pool. He said he saw long lights he liked. People made funny faces and were flying. That image of the boys contained Philip and Jutta contained in the pool. I continue with through the poem, because what I say is that at 4 o'clock I go into the water myself from 4 to 12. I am the guest. I come in through the top door of the water 4 to 12 for the public aquarium. I'm a diver. But I picture myself coming into that door, not sort of as somebody triumphant who can control nature, who has this giant 5-foot-long fish that bites my toe and that kind of thing. Not that. As a matter of fact, I put myself in as really not transcendent. Door-to-door tank displays on my shift don't get visited by out-of-tank appearances in their own likeness, hiding gifts of transcendence and wisdom. In other words, I don't come in as the godfish or the fish god. We know now we're not that. Rather than glory, I bring tubes and cylinders trailing old air, poor disguised flippers for wings, and gifts no more than of care and feeding. That's what I do. I work there. I work saving nature. So the first image there is the boys in the pool, but they're able to get outside the pool and look in through the window underneath. And they like it. It's fun. The next image is me in the pool. But I'm in there in a medium. I'm in there with the fish. Here's the fish. They live in a timeless solution of their histories, the living broth of their other lives, their dead, their brothers. I find something familiar in these small squares, these boxes buried in the public air of the aquarium, the slave Atlantic's water, blocked each into a plot. Water is one with its everywhere. All of a sudden, I'm swimming in the history of fish. I'm swimming in the whole generation of the whole evolution of fish in water. And then all of a sudden, I'm swimming with my family. I'm swimming with my own history. It was actually Atlantic water that was shipped into us, swimming in that. So all of a sudden, in the middle of the poem, we're all together. I find myself swimming with the people who were lost in the Middle Passage. Just find myself swimming with the wash-off of lives, the mix-in of lives. So there's that third image. And the end image here is where I suddenly discover one night that I know the fish, one of the fish in the aquarium, that I've seen that fish before. It's a South American fish, and I thought I hadn't seen it before. But I suddenly realized that night that I had seen that fish before. And when we were in South America, we were caught in a flash flood. We lost our equipment, our food, and we didn't have anything to eat. The next morning, the Indians who were with us, we went up and down the river going through the pools left by the flood, and we found a plecostomus. You know those little gray things that look like battleships that sort of eat the algae off the walls? It's called a plecostomus. They get about this big. One night, I was walking down the hall, because I liked the 4 to 12 shift, walking down the hall, had the lights out. I suddenly realized, that's it. That's the thing that I ate. That's the thing that saved my life. That's the thing that the Indians found for me, to feed all of us, so we could get back alive. So here I have been all this time taking care of my lifesaver. So that moves from the boys in the pond, in the pool, peeking in, able to peek in, to me in there as a job, in there living in those cubes, going door to door in that water, and then all of a sudden discovering that water, someone in that water has kept me alive. Now that's an image also of those folks who did make the Middle Passage, because one of those folks has kept me alive, my family, my father, my mother. So that image is meant to move along that sort of trajectory. And I wanted that image to wrap up in the end by explaining that the boy's mother is white. The boy's father was Zulu. And that night we all, that night we were all dancing in the kitchen, dancing in the living room after having dinner together. So the poem ends with all of us sort of dancing and having a good time to Lou Donaldson. But I wanted to explain that to show you that you can take these images and just include, and not stand up there sort of like, I am the boss, I am the god of this. You can put yourself back into nature, so that you can get your reader to feel these things. That's at least what I was hoping that I was trying to do. I have another image of our endurance. This poem is part of a series, so you've been through the water in that version. Here's the water in another version, another statement of our life in life. After the poem opens up as a riddle. After some days, and not because of the dirt, it really looked like a kind of earth, and not the fallen sky it had been at first. And the last word of the stanza is snow. It's the answer of the riddle. After some days, and not because of the dirt, it looked like a kind of earth, and not the fallen sky it had been at first snow, the first snow. Then I begin to talking about us in the water, but our history, our endurance, is as a system of nature. Our time in the physical is a physical fact of the water cycle. That water turns into steam, condenses into water, goes into ice, that sort of cycle. So I put that, our commemorative myth, I call it. Ours, like waters, is not material fatigue. Up and down, time after time, how many migrations has ice made home to water? A system. So we're in that water. Now I'm going to give you the picture of us in that system. The verdant tropical mist drip, tears gathering into the cold, bloody rivers of the Atlantic, grinding ashore, captured in the plantation's white glacial field. The rending melt waters burst toward a North Star, state to state of matter pressed upon us. Our material does not fail the strict coinage. You see the movement that goes there? You have the vertical tropical mists of Africa that drips tears on the shore as you were taken away. It gathers into the cold, bloody rivers of the Atlantic, the Middle Passage. It grinds ashore in Annapolis, wherever, Brazil. It grinds ashore, and it's captured into the plantation white glacial field, cotton fields. The rending melt waters burst toward a North Star, escape, getting away, rebellion. Burst toward a North Star, state to state of matter. State to state of matter, but state to state of matter pressed upon us. Our material does not fail the strict coinage. So we're strictly bound in nature, we're strictly bound in history, but we endure, is what I was meaning to say in that, with that section of the poem. And it goes on, but just to show you how you can use those images. Here's a hunk from Eclogue, the title poem of the title poem of the last book. I wonder if they ever stood completely over their own shade's dot. That moment they had no metered footprint. You know, when there's no shadow. But then the footprint turns into something else. A peekaboo we now find ticketed as a before and after, and either side of a space the zero pulls into, its long reserved wheel of nothing there. Earlier line asks whether the shadow hitting a certain parking spot, always, all the time, you're able to recognize the time of day. You know, you can sort of do that, look outside the sky, look at the shadows and tell generally what time of day it is. Did anyone ever watch to see the shadows move from the 110th floor or so? But now that spot, that footprint, that place where there was only the dot, like the stick in Egypt, once he tries to figure out the circumference, that spot becomes that parking spot. That spot, that emptiness, that empty hole there becomes a parking place where zero pulls into. Its long reserved wheel of nothing there. That sort of emptiness, that's the man-made emptiness there. That goes on to show us in this world. From the Jersey side, we take a bearing as on mountains, from the vantage of the plain, on towers, from the vantage of the dirt-stiffened, unyielding tarmac of marsh grass, gray like steel grade, a vegetable steel from blur and the exhaust of the turnpike. Coming down the New Jersey Turnpike, you see New York for a long time. You drive for a long time watching that thing, and it's kind of a bearing you take when you first see the Empire State Building, when you see the Chrysler Building, you sort of know where you are. That goes into, we map our way with only the bearing of surrounding life, itself borderless, uncontrolled by the surface of ourself. You see how I'm moving that circle through the poem, and then the levels of the circle towards the end of the poem. Take each story of a building as a radius of expansion we make of the earth, concentric spheres on Turtle Island. 110 circumferences go nova. So you can see each time a life makes more of a life. It gets taller or larger, and then we lose 110 levels out of the circumference of the world. I hope you're following what I'm trying to do. I'm going to go into the new ones here and show you there's another way you can do that. Those things bring you to the feel of it by history. You're telling the story of your family, or you're telling the story of your godkids, and you're made to feel the earth through their joy, and you're following their joy with another kind of swim in the water, that sort of thing. the earth being, you being in the earth as part of it. Here's another way you can do that. This is the lunar eclipse. At the beginning of the lunar eclipse, at the beginning of the lunar eclipse, there's this one funny little joke. One of the hard things to do is after you set up a little piece of geometry like that, to get it, to manipulate it, to move it around, and still stay within the image. I'll show you one of those a little bit later, but here's a short version. You can do a whole stanza of that. Here's a short version. You've seen only a planed circle of moon, the white wafer. Here we start. The low sky's flat penny grow into that dime flipped in the turn taken by the earth. You move it through there, and then you move it through the veil of brightness that's taken away in that thing of chance of flipping the coin. The brightness taken away, and then you actually get to see the red marble. You get to see the ball of red clay that's pinched into a bowl. But what I wanted to do there was make you begin to feel tactily the space, because this poem is about bringing space closer. It wants you to sort of feel space. So after I finished playing that trick on you with flattening the moon, flipping it as a penny, I turned it into a bowl with an inside, and that's where we are. What you've missed is a red marble, a pinball of blood, and it's your shot, a ball of red clay before it's pinched into a bowl, and that is what I want to say, and it's looked that far away. I want to say it suddenly turns three-dimensional. The piece of clay turns inside dimensional for you. I want to say it suddenly turns three-dimensional with shadow shaded in at the drawn earth curtains darkening. The earth's shadow crossing the moon makes it suddenly look three-dimensional. Once it is that lighted ball, here we go, we're going to play with this now. Once it is that lighted ball, falls above a night now floored with depth, so dark above you, you can feel the feet and meter fill the time. New Year's confetti, and all of a sudden it switches over one more time. New Year's confetti, each, one more time again. Each specks fall a galaxy ago back into space. Just jump you through those different senses of space. Space back into space restored. That's all I wanted. I just wanted you to look up at the moon and really realize that there is space between that globe. It's actually round. It's not just flat. That globe and this globe you have to put your feet on. Space back into space restored beneath the moon to here in the shading of eclipse. All of this down to these lines here. We have to feel the spatial in what we see to see clearly. The eye measure in hands and feet. And then the image, the eye measure in hands and feet. And then you actually have humans measuring each other in hands and feet, going in and out of each other with directions and all kinds of, it's wonderful. But the idea is that you see yourself whole, and you see yourself whole in whole perspective. You see yourself in space, not just sort of out there in love. You see yourself in space, or not just wrapped up in each other. I want to do two more. I want to show you two more of these images. And then you can probably, I'd like you to sort of go on and ask me questions. In Top Boy, in the sequence, I've been playing with putting the human, putting myself, putting my family back into nature, making us images inside nature, making us feel ourselves inside nature, like you can feel yourself swimming in a pool. I wanted you to feel yourself in the earth that way. Take our world inside the earth in that way, the pool inside the earth. Top Boy is another version. What I do with Top Boy is try to turn the thing upside down, try to show, going down this way, show the earth from the distance. Those first shots from space of the moon, of the Earth rising, shot from the moon, of the Earth rising. You get that beautiful picture, that blue marble, they call it. What that meant to people, just seeing that and realizing that that's what you have to stand on. William Stafford talks about a trip he took as a young man alone out camping, and he said that trip changed his life. What he realized when he looked up at the stars at night was that there was that and there was this. And he said always he has those two things, and him living in between those two horizontal layers, sandwiched between those two horizontal layers. He said that magnificent thing gave him all he needed of God, all he needed of earth, all he needed of everything. So his images came from that. I think for a lot of folks, seeing the blue marble for the first time was just about the same for them as it was for Stafford. It was one of those things that's going to be with you as an image, as a sense of space, a sense of how big you are, how little you are, for the rest of our life, for the rest of my life, I know. So that is what's shown up in this poem here. And it's a flight home to when I was living in New Jersey. And it begins with starting out with the geometry thing. The state of New Jersey is the base of a triangle underlying that approach to its point. Underlined from the Delaware Water Gap to Newark. They announced that we're beginning our descent over top of the Delaware Water Gap, and you're going to end that descent in Newark. So the Earth is the whole state of New Jersey is the basis of that triangle. But it goes on to ask, where did we get that perspective? Well, from hunters who've had to walk around and memorize the land, know where the lakes are, know where the food is, know where the pelts are. We get it from them, but also we get it these days. We get it from a different place. Where did we get such long perspective? Where we can say that's Detroit by the link of the lakes. And there is a point going east where over Lake Erie you can actually see Lake St. Clair, and then in the distance on the horizon you can see Lake Huron. And so you're actually dealing with two of the Great Lakes and the connecting lake, Lake St. Clair. So you're sort of looking out the windows, looking at three lakes. But what is that? Someone saw that in their imagination. His feet figured what a Boeing 757 picks up and puts down, pacing off my passing through the world by air. But his passing through the world was by foot hunting. And we inherited that with this view. Ours is much larger now, but we inherited that view. My passing through the world, my way by air, his way by foot. And here's where the transformation comes in. But we've seen the ground ball up into one step. All of those steps that he had to take, we've seen the ground ball up into one step and stand on nothing else. That's the image. Our footing in the vacuum, the diminished sky of solar space, us put into perspective. We haven't seen answered, though, even though we've gotten control of that much of the view or can see that much. We haven't answered, though, whether there's direction after all the dream lines, after all the quests to see, after all those quests have hunted circumference down, have hunted to circumference. You found circumference now. You've seen it. You've ridden it. Okay, now do you control it? Well, you don't. You don't. It's like you're on a circus ball. You look down, and your feet are in a step from which there is no step off. And it talks about the hunted, how the hunted has to stay away from the hunter, and how that distance between the two of them turns into death. Or is that should outcome stepped in, become their one in perspective, step from which there is no step off. So the place where there is no step off has two dimensions now. Limitation, nature's limitation, and the other of nature's limitations, death. Earth is the footprint of life. Then it goes on talking about us being carried again, this image of us being carried in this basket on the head of the earth, and the plane simply as a piece of fruit, the sun shines on and ripens to the end of the journey, ripens to the sweet fruit at the end of the journey, which is home. And we think that we don't experience that. We think we don't experience that kind of space. But here, the earth is all of step ever taken by most of us, we think. But the aisles of air we walk about with the seatbelt sign off, hang off our backs. You do. And they hang off our backs like angels' wings or motion lines such as drawn in cartoons, or the tesseract of 4 dimensions. You've seen the cube that has the extensions that are meant to show time. And that cube sort of worn as our space helmet. We live in that cube world, that 3-dimensional world, and rounded on that sphere is our home. But in that, his feet, he looks down again and he sees his feet. Sunk in time, the footprint of life is death, the grave. So the poem has worked all the way around. But at the end, it reverses itself again. There is no step, the grave there is no step out of, the compost thirst. The earth is the footprint of life. So, compost earth, is that really beautiful Whitman poem. Questions? Mm-hmm.
So, your interest is in, you've been talking to us, one way of characterizing it, you've been talking to us about geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I love looking from, I love doing the sort of things you describe about seeing Detroit and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking that 100 years ago this was not possible.
Yeah.
And it is when you have some understanding, maybe even when you don't, when you have some understanding of geological processes and you ride over, let's say, a line of mountains, you can see that you can easily imagine geological processes that you read about in a course of geology. So that's fun. And but I'm thinking about the sort of conflict between going by foot and going by air.
Mm-hmm.
And such a beautiful thing it is to go by air, but such a destructive thing it is as well. We talked about living in fire and the and I guess what I'm sort of edging this toward is how do you feel about the ethics of consumption of fuel and the and living in a geometry that's used to kill people, in the sense that same sort of sighting, is developed into weaponry and so forth. So forth. And I think, much as I love riding in airplanes, I now feel some guilt about riding in airplanes and enjoying that view when you consider what it is we're paying for the consumption of the fuel. And I'm not sure if maybe I'm just importing something that belongs in another discussion and shifting it toward ethical matters. But I wonder what your thought is about this, because there is the poetry of walking and the poetry of the bird's eye view. I guess what I'm saying is I just feel the calculus of what it takes to buy the bird's eye view these days.
Yeah. The way I was looking at that is that the walking had its limits as far as you could go in order to, and still be able to come back. That was their limit. And we have this new limit now of being able to see from those distances and be able to actually hunt, thinking of the distances as a circumference. How far does it go around? And we've been able to hunt the circumference to its end.
Yes.
Well, the idea there is that that's our limit. That's as far as we've got, and we're living on that. The next poem talks about seeing the earth before the end of the world.
Yeah.
So that comes later, that what we're losing along the way. We're losing the glaciers. That's what this poem here is about, losing the glaciers, losing the bear. And the cost of it, the last line is, hunting the bear, we hunt the glacier, but the changes come of that choice. And I wanted to go, the rest of the poem has to go into the choices, what you get from the choices. So, yeah, I'm going to take that up, but I still think that along the way, I want to keep appreciating what people, as far as people got, and with knowing what they knew, taking it as far as they could, knowing what they knew. So we now know that we have to be a little more careful. Now, how far can we take that? That's our next step, you see. So that's our next limit, actually. If we don't figure out that limit, we're stuck. I mean, stuck. Is that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Whitman, and I'm just wondering, maybe this is an impossible question, but whether there is an ecological consciousness in past poetries that we have lost and need to regain, or whether there's an ecological consciousness that's available to us that is new. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I guess I'd really like to hear your thoughts mm-hmm. about ecology in literature and mm-hmm. what kinds of precursors you see for yourself mm-hmm. and maybe what the limits and problems of those precursors are, and who your comrades might be, and mm-hmm. they may not be literary.
Mm-hmm. What part of the reason I gave you so much personal history at the beginning was to show you that a city boy gets stuck in Alaska, so mm-hmm. you actually have to you have to deal with it. So that was hands-on, really getting close to it and loving it. That was the other thing. The first time you discover, that you could actually die today and people wouldn't know you were dead for a week or so, that kind of thing. Just your own value in such a huge space. Yeah, there's that personal experience. But when I came back, what was going on and with my generation was what they used to call ethnopoetics. Jerome Rothenberg and people were reading all, and plus there was a Black arts movement where folks were going back and reading old the African stuff too, Agatha Meili and Ndaba, My Children, the South African one, reading those kinds of stories, and you actually got their feel for what they knew of the world, of nature, from reading those old texts, from reading those old poems. And one of the things I really loved is when we had to read, or I had to read poems where people talked to themselves as though they were animals. Rothenberg has one song in there where it's for hunters going out to hunt whales, but the whale is singing. So there's that kind of, you're one of us. And that myth they always tell about the giving something to the dead animal and thanking it for being in the way of my arrow so that I can feed my family. If there was that sense, we create that now maybe, but if there was that sense, that's what we'd have to get back to be able to take care of things to the point where we can actually say, okay, thank you, you're going to do this, others are going to be left enough to continue, like I'm going to feed my family, you feed your family, but at this point I need one of you to give me food. That kind of connection to the world, we got to come back to that. And I see it in those old songs, those songs about wanting to be bird, wanting to turn into a bird, wanting to live as a bird, and feeling that you are a bird, but you're walking on this earth, so you have a kinship with the birds, that kind of thing. So you don't kill any birds. That kind of connection, I think, was there, and we only get it in literature now. We only get it in stories. It's not something that we actually experience We need to sort of get back to, and that's the reason I was thinking that trying to make things feel, because those poems, those like that whale song, the whale that's going to be killed is the whale that's singing. That whale song, that's feeling. That's feeling there, and I think that's synesthetics thing to say. This is my whale finger, or to write in the poem. This is my whale heart that's going to die. That to be able to get people to do that kind of thing, is kind of good. The Blake thing, what is it? The world in a grain of sand, infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. That's pretty grandiose. But if we could realize it, that's an ideal. That's something that you want to be able to appreciate, not control. Something you want to be able to appreciate and live in that, not stand there, with these things in your hand, like trophies. But you want to be able to know that somewhere in my own hand, there I go as infinity. Just a flash in that infinity, and be able to feel that. I had a friend who was afraid. She was actually afraid of stars. She did not like to go out at night and look up at the stars. She said it crushed her. She said it just crushed her. There are other people who have that feel. Just among the phobias, fear of the stars is one of them. It's a real thing.
Astrophobia.
Is that?
No, I'm just imagining what the term is.
Yeah, I don't. So that kind of everybody feels that, that sense of being little, but you've got underneath it, you've got this sort of my place in nature is I'm at the top. So here I'm the boss looking at the boss. We talk as equals. Yeah, well, you try to talk to him that fast, you're gone. I mean, that's all the time you have, in this life compared to some of those other things. And I'm always trying to pull that in, that it takes time between things, like the plane falling from the air takes 5 minutes, or the train stopping takes a mile before the train stops. But there's a disaster coming. Well, that's us. We're sort of living through, sitting on a train, watching ourselves crash. But that's it's time. Whether you got enough sense to jump off or not, and try to pull the brake. I don't know what to do, but. That sense, we need to have that sense of something feelable or understandable or graspable in our own language.
So when I think about this, I think about our role in literary culture and intellectual culture, and we're spinners of ideology, we're spinners of terms and values that circulate within our culture, and then it expands. So what are the values that we might, what are the concepts and values we might be spinning that might be a little more productive? And I think we're pretty far from that, because one of the first things that occurs to me would be renunciation. The idea of renunciation, the idea of avowing not doing something, I don't think that's a concept we think enough about, and we think about compulsion, and we think about regulation of other people and of other forces, but I don't think we're closely attuned to the idea of self-regulation and putting in seeing the advantages of living within constraints. I mean, the ideology that we're participating in has to do with pushing limits and pushing beyond constraints and the sort of the godfish, but I mean, there's a conflict also. The poem is engaged with everything. The bird's eye view is the product of extraordinary ambition, and the thrill of that is very great, and that's what I think that's what we're teaching, in a sense, in the universities, is the thrill of barely imaginable acceleration of accomplishment.
But I think people are going to start teaching. There's this other thing too. There are limits. There are limits in the group, like birds flocking, or fish schooling. If you're in a group like that, there's that movement transfers to the group almost instantaneously. And if you can get that key fish or that key bird to, like you say, renounce doing it, then that's the direction the flock is going to go. And I think that people are going to realize that they are shoulder to shoulder with something. The way Oppen talks of being numerous, of coming into the city and being shoulder to shoulder, and we'll be told, and we'll all know at once that thing he says at the very beginning of being numerous. That we'll find that out. Our own personal idea of grandiosity is going to hit against the next guy's grandiosity, the next bird's grandiosity, and eventually that thing is going to transmit through the flock and get us somewhere, but we don't know where it is just yet. I don't think it's complete suicide. I think it's really ugly what looks ahead, but I don't think it's complete suicide. I think there are enough people, enough birds looking ahead to see that somebody's going to have to make a turn somewhere. And I think once those key birds turn, it'll transmit through the flock. Or maybe that's just being hopeful.
Well, it is being hopeful, but that's not bad in itself.
When you were talking about the world and the earth, I was reminded of Brock's whole distinction between a world and the world. Like, it is a world and not the world, and all that bit. Where I suppose a world is something that's like constructed by individual experience and perspective. The world is something more objective that's beyond us, certainly more collective. You were saying that the world is driven by the earth. I was wondering if you could say more about what you mean by the world. What's the role of objectivity?
The world is human perspective, and I'm thinking that we don't put ourselves in the earth. We're just now beginning to see ourselves back into the earth again, as something that grows, something that dies. We're putting ourselves back into that. But that's the distinction, that the world is inside. Now the world, and that's what I mean by the world can end. Okay, you want to see the world before the end of the earth, or you want to see the earth before the end of the world. You see, you want to see the natural things before they're destroyed, but that isn't the destruction of the earth. That's the destruction of the world that you can live in. It's not the destruction of the earth. Does that help?
Subjective, do you think of what you're calling the world? Is it something subjective, or is it something that for us is objective?
No, I think it gets to the point where it is objective. Yeah, it's not subjective. You add your subjectivity to these other to this collective. And that's outside of us. That's an object. That's outside of us. Does that help?
This is sort of a different focused question, but in terms of what you're saying, sort of about perspective and about kind of this distance between things versus being inside of things, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of modes of address in your work. And I've been beginning to look through atmosphere conditions, and I've noticed that the first couple of poems are sort of addressed, at least in part, in the second person, but that often it's a second person which is sort of perhaps substitutable with the one, that it's kind of a more general second person, whereas in other places there's a very direct address going on. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that in terms of distance between sort of author and object.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm in control of it, but I have this feeling that in some poems, it's not my voice. It's a bigger. There are more people talking than me, and I guess maybe I'm repeating what I feel folks are saying, or that I feel as voices, as lives around me. So sometimes I talk in that voice. So, I don't always, even sometimes when I'm writing from I'm writing in that way of me looking at myself saying, you need to do this, or do you see that kind of thing. I don't write a lot from that testimony, that I, I that's there somewhere, but I bounce around from that a lot. I think it makes more sense to me, when I talk like that. It makes more sense to me when I sort of can feel responsibility for other people's words. Does that make sense? Or a little more responsibility for the words that I'm using, put it that way. I don't know if they're other people's words, but a little more responsibility for the words I'm using. So sometimes I think if you're down at that I voice, for me, that's more or less, blues voice talking to myself. I don't have to. When I do that, you'll catch me stopping in the middle of sentences, breaking things. There's a certain pace to that I voice that is just me, I. Certain pace to that that's different from the we or you. There's difference there.
Is there a sense in the poems then in terms of what you were speaking about in your example, where you kind of took us through the changes of space and the sort of changes of remoteness and closeness?
Mm-hmm.
Is there something similar in terms of your relationship as the author with the reader, where you're sort of switching distance?
Yeah. Let me say this. I was wondering, and I wondered a lot, when I was younger, and I asked my class this sometimes, did you have any memories of being that early synesthete that kids are? I think you're up until the age of 7. But some people remember that, or just certain instances will bring that back. And I'm one of those folks who sometimes it'll come back. And I've looked through the list of the 74 or 73 synestheses, or the list of the kinds, and the one that I feel isn't there. So I'm really curious about that. And it's a they're always, the ones that are listed are the ones that always have the 5 senses. There aren't any of the ones listed that have the other senses, the senses of motion, the senses of the internal, like you can feel your heartbeat, you see, but it's not the 5 senses, but you can feel your heartbeat, you can feel your stomach, you can feel when you're off balance. That's a system rather than a location. They talk about what is in the air and what is a distant sense. Well, those senses are systems. And what I get is more or less something like geometry. I had the devil shocked out of me the other day when I found a poem by Chris Martin that talks about this. I hope I didn't forget it. Just a second. The guy's name is Chris Martin, and he talks about, the title of the poem is the Geometry of Sleeplessness. And he talks about what he used to force himself into when he was a kid, and like walking like his father, those kinds of things. But also what he would do is he would get geometries in his head, and he would try to force these geometries to move around. He talks about pressing these geometries outside of it, through his skull. I wanted to go up and shake his hand. It's the first time I heard anybody say that, because that's the kind of thing that I used to feel when I was a kid. I used to dream constantly about this desert. It's a gray desert, absolutely gray desert, gray sky, and there's hardly a horizon. But the horizon, I could feel the horizon. And there was one grain of sand in that desert that I could feel that was really heavy. I don't know. But there are also certain times when I can look at certain objects and they feel heavy. They bodily feel heavy, not here. They bodily feel heavy, as though I had to pick them up. Because when I was a kid, I would think of myself in the dream as being back up against my eye like this, looking at that grain of sand. I don't know what that was all about. But the other thing too, I can feel kinds of certain kind of music or certain landscapes. I can almost ride certain landscapes. You're riding along, you're looking at it, and you sort of see that up and down. Your eyes are following it. But you can relax enough that you can almost feel it. You can sit in the truck, because I used to drive. My dad drove a truck. I used to drive with my dad, and I would do that. I'd sit in the trunk, and he'd be going up and down the hills in Pennsylvania, and I'd be going up and down both of them. It's a really weird feeling. I'm crazy, yeah. but that thing that you can actually bodily feel spaces. What Chris talks about in his poem, he talks about the geometries that he would play with. That feel, that you can feel spaces and manipulate them. I get that, bring that back in poems. I recreate that in poems. So that's the reason I deal with the spaces. Confession. That's where that real space thing in the poems for me comes from. I don't like. The other dream I used to have was green, just green. But where I was in green, I could look and see. It just went to infinity. I could, it's sort of almost like a grid. It was a grid. I could feel the grid. So I could stand here and sort of feel 1, 2, 3, 4 in all directions. I could feel it. Crazy.
I've been trying to figure out how to ask this, but I wondered until you just said that the feeling came, from your experience in childhood. If the focus on space and perspective and geometries in your poetry was a result of an interest in ecopoetics and just an inevitable result of it. If it came out of that in an ecology of your sense of things in relation to each other. Mm-hmm. But the question is, I guess, is ecopoetics something that you have a commitment to or a sense of responsibility for, or would it be enough for you to make a poem about your experience of green and the grid, and mm-hmm. does it have to engage the ecological themes?
Mm-hmm. I live a pretty simple life, but I haven't. I have friends who almost tally their garbage. That they know how to do that, where you can. At the end of the week, you have a little thing like this. They live so neat. They don't waste anything. I'm not committed like that. I don't do that. For one thing, I'm not that disciplined. I lose my shoes and stuff. But I think naturally I have that simple taste. And I think that's where I feel it feels like me. It feels, that kind of simplicity feels like me. And as I get older, I'm ready to take more off. And sort of read the old Chinese stuff. There's a point where you do, you just sit down and think about it. And sometimes I feel that kind of thing. I've written a couple of poems about that, but I haven't done it yet. But yeah, this writing is me dealing with it. I don't know that I can actually live out my own poems. I don't know. Sometimes I'll write things. I don't have the hope that I put in the poems. I'll write it and realize that it's a good thing to say, it's the right thing to say, and I want to be responsible for that. But I don't have any hope for it. That's the melancholy that you hear at the end of Eclogue, the final poem in City Eclogue. There's that sort of angry melancholy about the woman, the drug addict in Newark. That's sort of where that comes from. That melancholy comes from that kind of thing. That melancholy in the poem, bringing in that woman, comes from that kind of sense. I don't really have hope for some of the things that I write. And that poem, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I don't know. Does that answer? Tell me again. Give me.
Yeah, I guess if it seems like your description of formal and spatial and geometric properties has the way that you've done it in your poetry is by relating it to nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you have any interest in or could do it in a way that would feel honest without invoking nature. Just speaking formally, not without the content.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. And I was trying to say it by saying that I love that kind of simplicity. If I hadn't become the thing I wanted to do when I was younger, I wanted to be a painter. I used to draw all the time. I was pretty good at it. My dad could draw. He taught me to draw. I wanted to be a painter, but in our community, the thing was, those are for white people. You got to get a job, And so, even though I had gone to art school and I had training, I didn't come into college, thinking that I was going to do that. I just gave it up. Freshman year, you just walk through the door and that's gone. It's stuff that you just put away. And I did draw for a while, and I always did like the that kind of organizing things. And so I think you're saying, would I do this formality another way? Yes, it would be in art. It'd be in art. I would do it another way. And I do like minimalism. I like that. That's pretty close to home. And I was a potter. For a while, I would throw pots. And my teacher was Hui Ka Kwong, who's a magnificent potter. He's really good. And he sort of taught me to throw. And I always liked the things, and he got me on this. He told me what I was doing. I always liked the things that were a little, just a little off, just fine, but just one little thing off. And then he saw that just before he died. He started giving me a lot of Japanese stuff to look at. And that principle, wabi sabi, he made me look at that just before he died. And that's I didn't go back to it after he died, but that was pretty close to that simplicity. That sort of one little tweak there, that you liked. I would do that formality and that kind of say. I do it in art.
But not with words.
If I didn't have words, I'd do it in art. But all words are what I have. I feel myself pretty much crash landed here, in poetry, yeah.
I have a question that I think is somewhat related about your process when you write. And because I'm struck during this conversation by the degree to which you were able to describe the meaning of your images in relation to each other for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're able to go through a poem and describe to us what it means to you, how the images cohere.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how, for you, as in the process of writing, or later in the process of interpreting and maybe revising, these things start to line up so that you're able to do that. So that would be my first question: what that experience is like for you, and also how you feel about a poem being read or discussed outside of your control. If we were sitting together in this room and you were overhearing us read these poems and discuss what they mean to each other, if that makes you uncomfortable or not, if it's quote unquote wrong.
No. Both questions. The thing about the way I write, I revise a lot. For me, the writing is in the revision. I revise a lot, and along the way, I'll draw pictures of what I'm writing, or draw graphs, like T graphs, or equals, lists with equal signs to make sure that the qualities line up. To make sure that it's exact, that it reads consistently throughout the poem. Is that making sense to you? Yeah. So, like for instance, there's one poem I had in here I call "The Trees." I can show you exactly which. Yeah. I say, the trees are a sky whose spiderweb radio antennas search receives the rhythmic static of cicadas. A song arrives that died leaving 17 years ago. Deep cumulus leaves whose cloud and Milky Way are green, and heard but unseen insect star bursts have yet to reach us from, refract the sunlight filtered through the bright, brilliant spikes, explosions of nova in this hiss that one day our own insect sun will make in deep time, in deep song. Now, what that looked like was trees, sky, spiderweb, antenna, antenna and search, and the cicadas in the trees, like a graph like that, so that it reads down, because I have to go into that fourth stanza. The second stanza is "A song arrives." It's the result of that. If I'm going to propose that the trees are a sky whose spiderweb radio antennas receive the cicadas in the trees, then what happens? Well, what happens is a song arrives that died leaving 17 years ago. Now you hear, they say that the stars you see now are dead so many years ago. Well, that's the thing that I'm using here. Okay, so I had to do that, make sure that they lined up. In order to get down to the third stanza, deep cumulus leaves whose cloud and Milky Way are green, and heard but unseen insect star bursts have yet to reach us from. You can see the graph right there. The deep cumulus leaves are what used to be the sky. You see, so I just dropped everything down one, you see, and made sure that they stayed equal. Deep cumulus leaves whose cloud, white clouds, now become green clouds, whose Milky Way now becomes green Milky Way, and whose heard but unseen stars, which are now heard but unseen cicada eggs that are going to come back later, heard but unseen verse have yet to reach us. Just graphed. I graphed the thing. And I do that until I feel like I've got it exact and accurate. I want to be, those little patterns that I feel in my head, that you feel, intuitively. I want to be accurate at letting people, as accurate as I can, at letting people have those things, letting people see those things, and see them work. I like them to happen. I like you to go through a poem and have it happen. You hit here and that rings. You hit next and this rings. Hit here and that rings. I try to time it like that. That's the reason I do that graph thing. I do that, and I'm satisfied once it's done. Once I've got it done, and I can read it thinking that I'm reading it through your eyes, that you'll understand. I'm satisfied. Now, when you pick it up, it's on you. There was that point years ago when I really wondered, why the hell do you write if the language is different every time you pass it to the next voice? Where is there any language at all? There's that wonderful poem, Tom Luck's poem, funny as hell, Barn. It's about a barn. He talks about if he uses the word barn and he hates barns, and then the things in the barn, and then this guy uses the word barn and he loves barn, and he's asking, well, where's the barn? In the poem, which really comes down to, well, where's the language? And the language is, I gave it to you, I trust you with it. Whatever you want to do with it, hey, whatever you need, you're welcome to. And that's the human thing. It's gifting. You're not telling anybody anything. You're gifting people with information. I don't know. Does that help?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe graphing a poem like that, and that really, in after hearing you say that, I can now better understand why you're able to look at poems with just language, not about it in terms of images.
Pass this back to you. Yeah. Yeah, because I don't know why I do that. I mean, it makes sense to me. I guess it's part of the art thing, or the geometry thing that Chris's. I wish I could find Chris's poem. It's on the internet somewhere. Chris Martin is his name, and The Geometry of Sleeplessness is the title of the poem, but it's on the internet. And he talks about what geometry was to him. Mm-hmm.
So I have kind of a specific question, but in Lunar Eclipse at the end you talk about kissing.
Mm-hmm.
And is there something about kissing that sort of like approximates what you're talking about with experiencing nature, with having sensitivity to nature, like inwardness to outwardness? Sort of, where's the connection there? Is it the immediacy of
Well,
not seeing something,
in the image, in that image at that point, the way I was thinking the image to move was, there's all this space, and I keep moving the space, collapsing it for you, then expanding it for you, moving it back and forth like that. And then once there is that kissing image, the kissing image melts. Okay, tongues go into mouths, phalluses go into, I mean that. There's that, the last line, you have something about swelling into each other, or and distance disappears. Our eyes close and we see bodily. We see bodily in raised detail, a good heart erection. Raised detail, a measure deepened into our world, in each other. Her nipples stick up in your breast, into your breast. That's I want that space to be that intimate at that point, and have it just disappear so that you have that wholeness. That wholeness, they're one in each other. That was the whole perspective. They see themselves in whole perspective. You see what I'm working on? Just have it disappear, have that line disappear completely. Okay? Yeah, I put it in there. I wasn't sure anybody's going to read it, but that's the way it maps out for me,
Okay.
Can I ask you another question?
Mm-hmm.
What you're talking about, these extra senses.
I don't know whether they're there, whether I do a good job of raising them, but they're really useful in writing a poem,
Well, I think that, I wonder if a functional explanation is adequate to you, that is, for the kinds of things you're talking about, because I was struck by what you said, and I was thinking that I think I have a sense of what the objects in the room weigh,
mm-hmm.
For example,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I have that sense because I imagine myself moving the objects in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and if I didn't have it, it's this function that you think you have a sense of where something is because you imagine passage, and
Mm-hmm.
you are imagining what it would feel like to go over these hills.
Mm-hmm.
You're imagining yourself doing something and having a sense of what that would be.
You feel like, yeah.
And I wonder if that, because I think we do know a lot of things that, and a tennis player has
Mm-hmm.
very specific sense of space
Mm-hmm.
because of something that tennis player wants to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess this is my way of sort of explaining that, because, like I say, it's useful when I'm writing a poem. I can pull that kind of stuff up when I'm writing a poem, or when I'm sort of planning a poem by drawing a picture of it. So it's probably not wired in but it's probably being able to use a memory. You know, Nabokov's, I think of memory, using a memory like that I can actually, I maybe don't remember the specific thing, but I remember how to, like you said, you know, to function. I remember how to do it, how to get a feeling out of what that thing is. So it's probably not wired in. It's just a good memory of the things you used to do when you watched stuff as a kid. Yeah. Yeah. I don't mind it. I like it. It helps. Anybody? Anything else?
Thank you.
Take care.